What am I? What are we, anyways? What am I? What are we, anyways? Whew! That was a bit of a ride then, wasn't it? Good to have you all here. This is the last one. We started way back with some disquiet with the way things are usually told to us. We didn't trust the standard model of almost anything. Wanted to see for ourselves how we as organisms start off. Wanted to see for ourselves and watch human children get words into their noggins. Searched for meaning in unlikely places. Ended up realizing that meanings were not things or existents, but words, phonology, appearing in our mind's eye as inner speech. We grogged that brains aren't computers and concepts don't necessarily win go and chess matches. Lived perpetual spaces aren't three-dimensional Euclidean abstracts, but more like Legoed together fabrics of the mind. We tried to take the perspective of that archetypal, otherworldly outsider, seeing us large and small without accepting typical human prefabricated explanations. Looked at many things from a perspective that seemed to take things out of context and examine them against larger processes that we normally don't notice or apply together. For some of you, those who have stayed with it, slogged it out, the journey may have been pretty uncomfortable. Along the way, we've had to give up many kinds of old-fashioned securities and sureties. I'm afraid that this way of seeing us human beings is monumentally deflating. It robs us of many presumed exceptionalisms of so many varieties and refuses to see us as a genius species of inestimable worth. We like to see ourselves as a genius species with superpowers of perception and thinking. It's a bit like when we were forced to give up the homey Ptolemaic Earth-centered cosmos for its Newtonian Einsteinian replacement. But it's also solipsistic, isn't it? The truth isn't out there. Mind things are created by the mind-body culture in myriad upon myriad echo niches. Outside the skull doesn't exist except as brain-legoed analogs of other analogs. Externalized knowledges make it seem like what us word processors are doing perdures and somehow is timeless and inherent to space and time. Recurrent stories that we tell and retell ourselves and each other make it feel like the stories represent what is independent of the words making up the story. But you can't blame me for everything. Science already makes us feel like an infinitesimal speck of complex organic matter clinging to a tiny rock floating somewhere in an unimaginably large and largely dark multiverse, quantum realities already have largely left us without much surety. Our machines are tending towards superintelligence or a future of superpowers, with or without us, it seems sometimes. We've shapeshifted from the hero of the Bible story, Adam the Magnificent, apple of God's eye, to just another word-processing naked ape. This jarring shift of reference is threatening in many ways. And the shift of reference of this book has maybe been equally jarring. Let's count the ways. First, there is no out there. From the great unknowable plenum, the world and our senses and our minds and the stories trundling through our minds are co-created for survival and reproduction like for all species in all times. Our flesh itself, our senses and our thinking mechanisms, our six-layered cerebrum, fabricates the needed illusions of perduring selfhood and jury rigs, actual existence, romping in self-fabricated 3D space and living through self-fabricated real, R-E-A-L, real time. Through much of history, people probably have had very much more fragmentary senses of what and who we are. They lived lives more like clever hominids than modern, unbelievably endowed and embedded in culture humans. Our present, universally accepted standard model is actually quite recent. Pre-media folk didn't believe in the 1,000 interlocking knowledges that today are the standard canon. Recently implanted modern knowledges have vanquished all other ways of perceiving existence. The story parts of astronomy and physics and chemistry and biology place us in space and time and define our being. We see ourselves through the themes, memes that modern life has given us. And we believe, just like we believe our senses and believe thoughts that appear miraculously in our mind spaces. Our primal sense of certainty, what I see, sense is real and accurate, has been expanded to the word world. Atoms, electrons, quarks, and platypuses are really real. And the story world, the story of history is true, a pretty good reflection of what was. And we've come to live in our media as surely and as without question as primitive man lived in his savanna or forest. As I've opined a few times, I believe that for most of human life history, individuals had far fewer words racing through their minds, much simpler procedural knowledges of all sorts, and a way of being much less embedded in the kind of culture that has been unconsciously engineered these past centuries. It wasn't until the canon of extended, in print, then via media of all sorts, extended knowledges were propagated that the species started telling itself clan imprimatur meme stories that we imagined us to be so very exceptional in. Differentiating neural tissue joins the world, the worlds, and ourselves together through use, as it does, presumably, for all larger-brained creatures. Culture and neural tissue co-creates humanity in uniquely different ways now that it did a mere 3 centuries ago. The noosphere, the word world, unexpectedly took over all the animal impulses of humanity over the last 1,000 years or so. It bootstrapped and supercharged energy technologies, food technologies, self-protection technologies, weapons, and health technologies that resulted in exponential increase in the numbers of humans and the reshaping of the Anthropocene. While our stories about ourselves remain fragmentary and mired in past mythologies, although subject to inflation. Dynamics in the group, the pack, the clan, the nation necessarily spawn self-serving stories and lies. Words, concepts, and shareable memes coalesced groups and focused them on competitors' destruction. Absolutist pronouncements and ideas bound absolutely. Self-aggrandizement and absolutist thinking were supremely effective at mobilizing the cannon fodder. Lately, the process of examining the bases and the base of it all has brought much light that is difficult to continue to ignore, even if hard on the human ego. Observing the mechanisms of vision and many other contributory brain technologies begins to elucidate the reality of the world through our senses. Studying and analyzing language and communication, paying attention to human and animal functioning in more and more detail, eschewing false idealisms and vintage philosophies, all are forcing a total rethink of everything. And it's hard. While at the same time, the globalization and mechanizing and monetizing of media has also entrenched, possibly permanently, the fragmentary standard models of all things human, partly because we love the models so fervently. Self-aggrandizing idealisms, jingoistic, national and species-specific cheerleading, suppression of disturbing ideas and contradicting data. We seem to be drowning in adolescent superhero fantasies of every variety that feel so good. We still mightily glorify war and our side's righteousness. Money and power fund and accentuate puerile inanities of every variety, as it ever was. But it has become so much more effective and centralized than in the past, so well industrialized and monumentally monetized. But what would it be like to live with all these new realizations? What would it be like to give up so many exceptionalisms and superpowers? What would become of us? Those of you who followed the thinking in this worthy tome probably know the answers to these somewhat spurious questions. If history is just exactly as it has to be, it's fun, but a bit of a fool's game to wish it otherwise. If we're created and largely determined by our environments, upbringing, and culture, that themselves are almost completely constrained by universal influences, it seems futile to rebel against what we are. If words and concepts and knowledges are essentially epiphenomena, what's the use of any of it? More personally, if I don't really exist like they told me that I did, but I am a fragmentary and ephemeral world organism co-creation, what am I supposed to do or feel? A quick and true, for me, story. Until I was 22 years old, I was a super intense, born-again Catholic studying to be a lay monk, sequestered from temptation and sin, being implanted with all the old Catholic knowledges, praying, constantly fasting. A completely committed, hoping to be a saint one day, practicing Catholic. And then one day, I lost my faith. The struggle up to the day and minutes I'm describing took place over a year. That's true. And I was terrified of what it would be like to be without everything I had believed in, body and soul, for the previous 7 years. My whole life had been given to religion and faith. Struggling in thought, doubt niggling at me, walking along the mighty Hudson River in New York, suddenly I looked up and a beam of sunlight flashed through my glasses, streaming into my eyes and into my soul, apparently, because at that instant I acknowledged and said to myself, I don't believe anymore. And I didn't. All the sureties and absolute certainties of all the dogmas and practice and prayers and sufferings from that minute forth evaporated. Poofed. And suddenly, in my universe, in the universe of my mind, there was no God, no good book infallibility, no Mary or Jesus or love or life after life. Oh, there was flotsam and jetsam, detritus of conditionings, admittedly. But letting go, giving up all the ideas that had driven me for more than 7 years, seemed to cost me nothing. I soon left the monks, began a different life. The old thoughts never haunted me, and the loss of presumed sureties led to new questionings and new false sureties. And on and on. That's my story. And it relates to giving up cherished bromides and interesting but fallacious just so stories in a way that I found was something lost, something gained. Much more generally, I think the wonderful old Zen koan applies. Before enlightenment, carry wood, carry water, chop wood. Before enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. After enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. Our being in the world is of a present-day dominant simian with words. Words have given us power, it's true, but they aren't what they seem. And they don't make us deep down too different from our cousins, the great apes. As individuals, we are fragments, cogs in large systems that are mostly mindlessly playing out deep processes that are not cognitive or particularly susceptible to rational comprehension. History, literature, philosophy, and religion perforce took the individual human being as the starting point, the taking off place of their endeavors to make sense of life, implicitly believing in the mind and its processes, implicitly believing that stories and essays captured a reality. And it made us feel really good to be seen as so intelligent and exceptional and indeed godlike. Skepticism was not wholeheartedly and systematically applied to thinking itself, or to the input of the senses, or to somewhat outlandish stories about superhero beings dwelling in alternate dimensions. We had a lot invested in being so exceptional. All of us became godlike, after all. It felt good. So don't fret, dear reader, dear watcher. Truth or falsity change nothing. Pop philosophy, pop religion, and pop history are really great infotainment. What I believe is mostly what I hear in my head that makes me feel good. In spite of what the media has been telling me, I live my small life of needs and desires wrapped in small but comfortable and comforting illusions. We will all continue to chop wood, carry water, dear readers. We will all continue to chop wood, carry water, dear viewers. We'll surely continue to make up our stories and feel omnipotently exceptional. After all, as the I Ching long ago reminded us, the Tao does not share the anxiety of the wise sage. After all, as the I Ching long ago reminded us, the Tao does not share the anxiety of the wise sage. And thank you all for being with me through this long walk.